Hey guys, Omni here. Welcome back for another breakdown from New Rockstars covering this week's episode of Loki, episode 3, which took a crazy turn towards the end of it. There's a lot of fun stuff sprinkled throughout the episode, man, but holy crap, did it turn into some kind of nightmare fuel there by the end. I can't wait to see what he has to say, what kind of thoughts they have. There's a couple of little things that I missed that some people in the comments pointed out. We'll get into that when it comes up. If you're not already subscribed to New Rockstars, please make sure to do so. And if you're not subscribed here, I hope you enjoy the reaction and maybe consider sticking around, leave it a like, all that jazz. With that all said and out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into episode 3's breakdown.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and this is a breakdown of Loki, season 2, episode 3. I love this episode. The historical period it took us back.
It was a really good episode, man.
With Frederick Douglass hair, Victor Timely ended up being, and how horny Miss Smith turned out to be. So let's break it down for all the Easter eggs, the cover design choices,
God,
and just
I was so caught off guard by
for watching these breakdowns.
Okay. Like, I'll just address it now. I knew she was kind of, like, there was definitely jealousy signs all throughout with her working with Ravonna, but the whole turnabout, give me a body so I can love you thing caught me off guard. I was like, I knew what you were alluding to. I didn't think we'd straight up jump right into that.
Recommending them to your friends and just giving us your time, because as we learned this episode, time is everything. Okay, the opening Marvel Studios title card includes a
not bad
version of Michael Giacchino's Marvel fanfare music.
It honestly took me a hot minute to realize it was a riff on it.
2016's Doctor Strange. And Giacchino is having a big week right now as his directorial debut, Werewolf by Night, is having a re-release in color. And that amazing production opened with a horror version of the fanfare.
And I think I also think some TV channels are actually going to be running it for Halloween too. I could have swore I saw it pop up when I was, like, as a commercial when I was watching Chucky this week. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm making it up, but I don't know. I mean, it fits.
Popularized by musicians like
we need more of those special presentations.
In the 1890s through the 1910s, it was known for a syncopated or ragged rhythm, the kind of music you would hear accompanying old silent films. But this episode is mostly set in the year 1893, but we actually begin in 1868, decades before ragtime was popular. So the episode opens on a weather vane in Chicago. The lower third tells us 1868
the winds are shifting.
The sacred timeline. The sacred
or
timeline
a storm is coming.
We are in the main historical continuity of the MCU, and in that continuity, there existed a young black man in 1868 who grew up to look just like Jonathan Majors, and thus like all the other Kang variants. We are not yet on a branch that is formed as a result of Sylvie's actions. We are in history as it always existed. This kid being right here was always part of He Who Remain's scripted plan for the MCU. Now, based on the geography of this scene we later get from the street level, this weather vane is atop the house that young Victor Timely is in. These other structures are shanties topped with chimneys and nothing more, but young Victor wants to know the vector of the wind. 1868 Chicago is an interesting choice of time. Not as interesting as 1893, as we'll see later, but it was 3 years before the Great Fire of 1871 that wiped out the city, and then 3 years after the Civil War ended, and after President Abraham Lincoln, who was nominated for the Republican ticket at the contentious convention held in this same city in 1860, was assassinated in 1865. So as a result of the 1848 opening of the Illinois and Michigan Canal and the first rail line to Chicago opened in the same year, Chicago exploded in population during this point in history, from 4,000 people in 1840 to 90,000 people in 1860, the largest city in the Midwest. The influx was primarily Irish, Catholic, and German immigrants, but during the Reconstruction era, black Southerners migrated to Chicago, and the black population from 1870 to 1890 went from 4,000 to 15,000. And it was all here, really, in the south side of Chicago. Actually, in this opening shot, you can see some factories billowing smoke into the sky. Assuming this would be the same part of Chicago that would later become the Columbian Exposition, this would be Chicago's south side near Jackson Park, and the south side of Chicago is known for having a history of racial segregation. Why do I know all this? Why do I care about it? Well, my wife's family has its history in the roots of the south side of Chicago, and she and I actually got married on Chicago's south side in the last year. In this muddy street across from Victor's home is an anvil with a sign reading R.B. Ellis, blacksmith, wheelwright, horseshoeing, wagon repairs, and woodwork. R.B. Ellis is the name of a Tulsa-based writer, but in Marvel, Warren Ellis obviously is a huge name in Marvel Comics, and the MCU former president Matthew Ellis is actually named after him. So maybe R.B. Ellis could have been Matthew Ellis's ancestor? It seems like R.B. is the blacksmith who later stares at Renslayer when she arrives. Renslayer steps into this mud, presumably the steps she took directly upon leaving the TVA in season 1 episode 6 in search of free will after Miss Minutes gave her some—
Could that be her metaphorically stepping into the mud?
files, but she didn't give her anything on the origins of the TVA, saying at that time,
"But I'm downloading the files you need now."
This isn't what I asked for.
I know, but he thinks this'll be more useful. Happy reading.
So before Miss Minutes tells Renslayer the important
forgot
person
about
she's gonna
that.
meet, she asks if Renslayer brought what she asked.
Oh, bless your heart.
Oh, bless your heart, as anyone who has read or watched Sharp Objects can tell you, is kind of a passive-aggressive Missouri way of saying, oh, you're so sweet, but also f you. And it's hints at some directive she got from He Who Remains.
Well, I've never
He
heard
told me
that.
That we need to put this package in that window. This was the plan he made when he knew the end was near for him.
This proves that He Remains knew that Sylvie was going to kill him, and that her doing that
Yeah.
was really part of his plan. Perhaps he wanted to clear a path for a different incarnation of himself to take over, or he just knew that that was the destined end for himself. And his mission now is to reset the cycle, to set up a future He Remains to reascend to the top of the TVA. Basically, to
That's
close
my
the loop.
guess
Now,
right
this
now.
young Victor Timely is just one.
That's what I said too. It was like he's propagating a loop. You know, the book itself is authored by Ouroboros, you know, which is, you know, the name of the symbol of the snake eating its own tail. The beginning is the end and the end is the beginning, because they both intersect at the same point. Very elaborately explored concept in Dark, which I would definitely recommend checking out if nobody has. But on top of that, you know, he's feeding himself information that came from him, but that came from the source of what he had created, and creates this paradoxical loop to, again, just kind of self-sustain itself, which is interesting.
Variant, but who knows? There could be countless other Jonathan Majors doppelgangers throughout history that also got books like this or would receive books like this had Victor Timely not gotten it first. It might have been He Remains to cast a wide net just to see which Kang would survive, to kind of cache all these little versions of himself throughout history, throughout the sacred timeline. Miss Minutes decides to alter appearance to a more classic animation black and white cartoon. They definitely didn't have that in 1868. Her
Yeah.
shoes now have pointed ends, and there are actual clock hands on her face. She tells Renslayer,
When he's back where he belongs, atop the TVA, you and I will be right by his side.
so is this a sincere promise from Miss Minutes? If there really is a love triangle among these three, it's just not clear if Miss Minutes ever really wanted to share room at He Remains' side. Now, Victor Timely, we see, is at...
See, that's what I thought too, but I think like in that moment, they're face to face, and I think she's putting on, like he said, you know, with his little, oh, bless your heart comment, she's saying what she needs to say to get the job done. All she cares about is reuniting herself with He Who Remains and setting him back on his path and getting him back in place at the TVA. I don't know that she actually wants to share any of that with Renslayer. And by the end of the episode, when they are both trapped together, I think that is a reluctant alliance that they just kind of find themselves in by the end of it all.
At his home, and he's doing what? Making candles. He pours wax into these molds, and we see candlesticks lining the room. It's just interesting that as an adult, he will be seeking ways to replace
I didn't even
the
notice what he
Edison
was
light bulb,
doing.
And as a boy, he is crafting ways to bring light. What altruistic
Oh, that's cool.
creations this boy might have grown up making had he not been cursed by this book dropping in his window. Now, this book is, of course, just a mere TVA guidebook authored by Ouroboros on every desk in the TVA, like Bibles in prison cells. But in the hands of an 1868 candle maker, it radiates a shade of orange unseen in this sepia tone neighborhood outside of a ghost clock hiding in a barn. I'm just obsessed with the idea of young Victor being a candle maker. One's reminded of the nursery rhyme, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jump over the candlestick. But the pop culture reference here with the book is the Sports Almanac from the Back to the Future trilogy.
Yeah.
In Part 2, that Biff Tannen gives to his younger self to get rich. While knowledge is power, a book in the wrong hands can be a very dangerous weapon.
Yeah.
Remains that
Oh,
all
that's
boring
such a
Kang
good-
variants originated in the
that's such a
31st
good
century.
parallel.
Let's not forget that. That's what He Remains said.
Eons ago, before
That's
the
true.
TVA, a variant of myself lived on Earth in the 31st century. He was a scientist, and he discovered that there were universes stacked.
Yeah,
on top
about
of
that.
So how does this square with
Yeah,
a Kang
that's a good
variant
point.
in the 1860s that is also part of the sacred timeline? I think the idea is that He Remains set himself a contingency where infant versions of himself from alternate 31st centuries were taken and placed like little Moseses throughout history on the
I
sacred
was kinda
timeline,
starting
just
to think the
waiting in
same
their
thing
lives
once
to
we
be
started
activated or not as part of He Remains
watering
contingency
this
plan.
theory
But
here.
until they are activated, no branch forms. They would just live on their lives as the normal history flows forward. So onto the TVA's Loom Room.
Wouldn't their inception into the sacred timeline from a different point in time by it? Well, I guess not, because the Avengers event was allowed to have happened. It was conscripted by him as well. So he could probably have manipulated that to where this could also be allowed, like interference within time still doesn't disrupt the actual flow and stability of the sacred timeline. So he could probably do exactly that, I guess, in that way, in the same kind of way that they explained away that whole mess. So I guess, I mean, we've got a precedent for it.
We actually stay in this state of emergency in a long take shot. We don't edit for over 60 seconds. OB tells them,
It's stable right now.
There's a lot of those, man, in this season so far.
These same branch timelines that formed are just resistant to Dox's pruning, or if other branches of equal number are just growing in their place. But either way, Dox's bombing didn't work.
Wasn't very clear.
OB says that he needs to increase the diameter.
Like, whether or not they regrew the lives that were lost, the timelines that were lost, regrew, like they just sprung back, or a new one replaced them. It wasn't very clear. I took it as as no matter what, like she pruned 30% of the current timelines, but by this point, it's already those branches, not the same branches, but new branches had filled in that gap within this small amount of time, to the point that what Dox did just didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. That's how I read it. If those timelines just regrew and they just can't be pruned or severed or whatever anymore, that would be an interesting thing, but that's not what I took it as, but it is an interesting thing. It didn't even cross my mind that might have been the case.
Diameter of the loom to boost throughput and clear that knot of unrefined time. For the time stream to be knotted just makes you wonder what incursions could be happening on that side of the loom. Mobius suggests
just pure chaos.
Having no idea
I
what
would
means.
I would love just like a cutaway to like what's going on there, but it says raw time. So are lives in that side of the loom, or do they need to be severed into something? But they're trying to weave the branches into that as well. But are the branches and raw time different? Is raw time an unformed timeline, like a potential timeline? Questions. I've got some.
Which reminds me of that joke in Office Space when Michael Bolton says, "Oh, we should just launder the money," and he doesn't really know what laundering is. So Mobius and Loki travel to 1868 to Victor Timely's neighborhood. Mobius doesn't recognize 1868 as historically significant, but he recalls 1871 fire. But Loki asks,
"Any major figure arises from here?"
He asks,
yeah, they're right there.
In front of the open window of Victor Timely's home, the window that Renslayer
They were
tossed
so close.
We get this fun camera effect where we follow them through the time door. On the other side of that time door was a dead end wooden wall in the alley. But on the other side of that time door, we now transition to
it was such a good transition, man. Branched timeline. That is what I missed. I did not see that because he was on the sacred timeline and he received that book, and him receiving that book created this branch. That's how I've understood it after the fact, and especially because I completely missed that. I didn't even bother to look at the little indicator at the bottom when I was watching it the first time through, until somebody mentioned it in the comments, and then I was like, oh, I went back and looked and I was like, oh crap, they're right. I thought they just jumped ahead. I mean, they did, but not on the sacred timeline, which begs a few questions.
The Midway Plaisance. Shields and flags representing several different countries line the gateway. The Ferris wheel we see is actually the world's first Ferris wheel, unveiled at this event in history, designed by George Washington Gale
I
Ferris.
didn't know that.
The lower third text establishes this as 1893 branched timeline. Aha, an important detail. So when young Victor Timely was just making candles, that was the sacred timeline. But Victor being given this handbook turned his life into a branch. The plan for that branch is to lead to a new He Who Remains to inherit the TVA. One innocent, uncorrupted Kang removed from the drama of the 31st century dogpile and the multiversal war, a successor that He Remains can trust to carry out his vision of the TVA. Mobius recalls the Chicago history during this time.
The White City, Edison, H.H. Holmes. Yes, hot air balloons.
So the World's Fair was actually a battleground between Thomas Edison's direct current, DC, and Nikola Tesla's alternating current, the AC system, to power the fair. They called it the Battle of the Currents. Tesla ended up winning, and he partnered up with Westinghouse to provide fluorescent lighting and dazzle all the attendees of the fair. Meanwhile, he mentions H.H. Holmes, who was a notorious serial killer who preyed upon young people who moved to the city for the World's Fair. He confessed to killing 27 people, but we don't know if he was was just lying because he loved his crazy reputation. Might have been way more than that. It might have been less than that, but he was most famous for a 3-story murder castle that was hyperbolized in the newspaper. And I love this horrifying way the newspaper that they buy on the far right column is an ad for World's Fair Hotel, and it was put in
Oh, no.
H.H. Holmes.
Oh, wow.
Right beneath that,
Life insurance? Are you fucking kidding me?
The newspaper shows a sketching of missed minutes and lists the date as Friday, June 23rd, 1893. This would actually be 2 weeks before
that's
the
so
final
cool,
correspondence of
man.
one of H.H. Holmes' victims, Nanny Williams, which was July 5th, 1893. She and her sister Minnie Williams were never seen alive again, and Holmes would actually use Nanny Williams' name in various scams. I am willing to bet that one of these mustachioed attendees with a rounded bowler hat in the background is actually H.H. Holmes. Could it be this guy on the
any
right,
one of
or
them
this guy
is
on the
the
right, or this guy who passes in between Mobius and Loki here?
It's like, it's the style of the time, man. He just looks like every dude at that period, like for the most part.
Murderinos. Now, notice how Loki in this episode wears a bright green tie with
Yeah.
this interesting pin clipping it to his shirt. It's just a little flash of gold to remind us of his horned crown, I suspect. Meanwhile, the shirt I am wearing is a Mobius design from our custom merch line inspired by Loki. Grab one of these is the best way to support us here at New Rockstars. Get it at nerdriot.shop. They pass a newsie.
Liberty Bell made a debut on 4th of July. Ghost Clock continues to haunt the Midway.
The Colombian Liberty Bell actually refers to the casting of a new Liberty Bell that was put on display in a replica of Independence Hall, normally in Philadelphia, but here they rebuilt it for the World's Fair. And this new Liberty Bell contained like metals melted down from like all kinds of famous historical relics. Loki and Mobius shot by a Crackerjack pavilion in the Visit Norway building with the wooden statues of Odin and Thor and Balder the Brave.
And why'd they include Balder? No one's even heard of him.
Sure they have Balder the Brave.
Amazing. Balder the Brave is Thor's brother in Norse mythology and
Yeah.
is a figure in Marvel Comics. He was believed actually to have been a part of the cast of the Illuminati in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse.
I don't know
Madness,
anything
played by
about
Daniel
him in the
Craig. And we
MCU or
actually saw concept
Marvel
art of this
Comics,
from
but
Daryl
like,
Warner, and Balder's
yeah.
helmet here looks like the helmet from that concept art. In an interview with Josh Horowitz, Daniel Craig played coy about this whole thing.
Have you ever heard of the character Balder the Brave?
No.
There was a report days that you were going to be in Doctor Strange. Don't you hide behind that mug, Daniel Craig.
He's going so red.
Thor and Odin have the chest plates with the 6 circles as they do in the MCU. So presumably there is a Balder in the MCU, and we're gonna meet him at some point. The latest trailer footage for the Marvels actually includes a shot of the Bifrost.
I called a friend.
Oh.
Rated PG-13.
Now, maybe this is just Thor, or maybe Balder's big debut.
That would be
is coming sooner than
cool.
we think. It's probably just Thor, or like Valkyrie or something. Now, as Loki looks at the statue
It's
of Odin,
probably
we hear
Valkyrie.
this mournful violin theme again.
What was that told?
But it gets cut off by Loki's jealousy of Thor.
Yeah.
Then Loki turns to see this wheeled cage of prize women.
Oh, that'll
like
come
Alpine
back.
Hogs. And this is actually the pen that he will later trap the tall brute inside of. On a sign for the Hofbrau Beer Hall, presenting the program of enormous attractions, showcasing tonight singer Ferdinand Lang with a German military band. Ferdinand Lang, you say? Perhaps an ancestor of Scott Lang. Enormous attractions, you say? Then introducing his greatest invention, Victor Timely's astounding temporal marvels. So, Victor Timely is one of the personas that Kang adopts when he decides he wants to dominate the 20th century, starting at 1901 in Timely, Wisconsin. This is when he would introduce robotics to American inventors, which is really just a plot to encode all future robots, including Sentinels, with a backdoor so that he could take control over them in the future, which would lead to the events of the Kang Dynasty storyline in the late 90s. So this
That's
really
such
looks
a
like bunch of
wicked
German
panel,
music
man.
acts in a
Not
beer hall
panel,
with a random
cover.
inventor plugged in the middle. My guess is that Victor took whatever he could get, or maybe swindled someone out of their slot. Later in this beer hall, the German band actually plays a cover of the Loki theme music. It's kind of like the disco rendition that we hear in the 1977 era back in season 2, episode 2. So they spot Renslayer, and she's wearing 1893 attire. Actually, Renslayer's name, according to her diploma in the season 1 finale, was Rebecca Tormenay, which is the alias Renslayer uses in the comics when she joins Victor Timely at the turn of the century. So Victor takes the stage.
Time is everything. It moves through each and every one of us.
Yeah, Jonathan Majors takes these long pauses as if really trying to demonstrate the weight of time to people by taking up as much of it as possible. Later, we learn that Victor actually has a stutter, though, and this might be an elocution tactic to keep himself from stammering. Victor carries a lantern with a candle, a token from his past as a candle maker, and symbolizing his role as an illuminator of ideas. PZ later recharacterizes being a con man as being a luminary ahead of his time. We saw a version of the scene in the Quantumania post-credit scene as Victor pledges,
But perhaps we can shape it.
and the front lights reveal his face, and the apprehensive murmur followed by the Baron calling him boy probably isn't lost on this man. Unlike Major's take on He Who Remains, Victor Timely is a separate creation, something between the con man Professor Marvel from The Wizard of Oz and the professorial Frederick Douglass with that hair. You could see his expo here as retroactively a precursor to Howard Stark's expo in Queens in 1943, 50 years from now. Another display that we saw in that first Cap film was Dr. Phineas Horton's synthetic man, a nod to the original android form of the Human Torch in the early Marvel comics. Marvel used to be called Timely Comics, it's worth noting here. And
I never knew that.
In that Marvel annual comic, it's established that Victor mentored Phineas Horton. Now, we don't know if Victor Timely here would have been anything more than a candle maker in the Sacred Timeline without getting that book, but I just like the idea that Victor was a clever enough engineer who could have inspired 20th century inventors throughout MCU history, including the Starks. Victor says,
Time is the future of energy.
So Victor goes on to dismiss coal or petroleum, saying that the energy of the past, present, and future flows all around them. So Victor saw the designs of the temporal loom in the book and used it as a machine to harness an electrical current out of the flow of time itself. Temporal radiation, he says.
Temporal loom inverts the temporal decay of the electricity flowing through it, lowering its entropy and gathering it into fine threads of power.
Entropy refers to the concept in physics and thermodynamics in which a system will naturally move toward disorder. Entropy measures the degree of disorder or uncertainty within a system, the degradation of matter and energy in the universe to an ultimate state of inert uniformity. As the universe expands, it expands, it expands. You could see a parallel here with what the Sacred Timeline is just destined to do. Things are destined to go from order to chaos. So his time-related term for that is temporal decay, which would mean that the flow of time, if it were untouched, would lead to inefficiencies, to friction, to incursions, and collapse. But by threading these, he creates an energy source. But while the energy source is what he's selling to these viewers here, what he's more interested in is kind of the act of looming itself.
A chaos of particles is transformed into order.
Now, of course, Victor's kind of talking out of his ass. Really, he's just kind of putting on Ouroboros' notes that he can't really fully put into practice yet because technology hasn't caught up yet. So really, he's just framing all this in the terms of the latest technology of the era, which would be the light bulb. Victor disses Edison's wattage to light a bulb and promises to light the whole city of Chicago and the entire planet. Actually, if you think about it, this is exactly what Tony Stark will later do with his arc reactor, installing it to power Manhattan with clean energy in 2012's The Avengers. This device on the stage here could be based on Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, which was meant to use the Earth's native electrical charge to power machinery. So maybe instead of Tesla winning the bid to light the World's Fair, in this branch timeline, Victor is kind of making the case that he should win the bids to power cities. But really for Victor, this introduction is
that would be interesting.
Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project started as a weapons program that later became a way to generate energy. Here, Victor pitches a way to harness energy with the device that will really be used as a weapon of mass destruction by the TVA. In the MCU's continuity, the Eternal Phastos helped Western scientists develop atomic fission that led to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So an argument can be made that through Victor Timely, He Who Remains is trying to bypass the 20th century nuclear brinkmanship that Phastos steered humanity into. Victor shouts,
If it can be dreamed,
that'd be
it
interesting.
can be achieved.
It's worth remembering that according to Multiverse of Madness, all dreams are us glimpsing into the lives of our multiverse.
That's a good pull.
Victor's dreams were him.
I always forget about that detail, man.
He Who Remains, people who had invented this technology already. He just needed some blueprints in his reality and the tools to physically construct it. Victor's loom ignites with bolts of indigo-colored energy, which is the same color of the Sacred Timeline in the season 1 finale and the branches that broke off from it. So Victor may not know it, but we are still seeing his first steps toward weaving that architecture. Renslayer stops him.
Mr. Timely, a moment, please.
Of course.
Here is the first time that we hear his stammer. It's when he sees Renslayer, who many of us have been theorizing might be He Who Remains' female variant. Victor says,
Well, I mean, I guess we don't have any way to confirm that because she's not at the TVA. But we do know that variants would work to bypass the system. Though she wasn't there to try her aura, but it does count off or strike off Ouroboros as a Kang variant.
Many moments as you like.
Yes, they're beginning the relationship as a transactional one in units of time, which is so appropriate. The robber baron offers Victor a partnership.
I don't do partners.
And another man with a waxed mustache says, I must have your loom. And Victor says, well, it seems my presentation has piqued much interest. Yeah, we saw the sweaty guy at the bar earlier drinking. So he is Victor's silent partner Plant, kind of like snake oil salesman having a guy in the audience being like, no, we have never met before, correct? Victor uses this Plant to upbid the robber baron to raise the price. When the robber baron gets to $1,000, Victor gives his partner a look to signal him to back off. And the baron called him a hornswoggler, which is an old-timey term for a deceiver. So he actually might even be wise to what's going on here, but he just wants Victor's tech so bad that he doesn't care. From inside Renslayer's purse, Miss Minute says,
It's not my plan, it's his plan. With our help, he'll be all he's meant to become.
So we can assume that it is part of He Who Remain's plan for Victor Timely to become...
What if it's all Miss Minutes just not able to let go of He Who Remain's death? What if she's using the power instilled upon her to bring him back? What if what happened was what happened, and this is just a Miss Minutes lie? I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think that's the case, but it just crossed my mind, especially after that back and forth, that exchange they had back in his lab, you know, when she was all like, I love you.
Something of a con man. Like, he kind of needs a bit of deception in a variant to be able to do the job. The tall man with the top hat, credited as Behemoth, starts a fight with Loki, and then Loki turns him into a puff of smoke.
Amazing Loki, everyone! He'll be here all week!
But Loki really just teleported him to the hog wagon, and later we hear that explosion outside.
Yes, my future!
Casal comes up to Victor to complain about a pair of mechanical trousers that didn't make him taller.
You look taller to me.
Yeah.
Dude, and we're talking about style and all that kind of stuff. I could have sworn that I was like, when I saw that guy, and even still, man, they look almost exactly the same to me. I was like, is that the same guy that played his heckler? I was like, he looks the same. And that goes to the whole H.H. Holmes thing. It's just like so many people just had the same style, and they all just blend together.
Yeah, Victor bends his knees and crouches to make himself kind of seem shorter to try to deceive his councilman. These pants actually might remind you of Stiltman from the comics, or really could just be an OG Iron Man suit before Tony built one in the cave with box scraps. The Baron says that the loom is a fake, holding up some shorted out circuits, it looks like. So yes, really, even though the loom was well intended and seemed to start to be able to do what Victor Timely dreamt it could do, in this case, it was all just smoke and mirrors. So they chase him past this Egyptian temple. He Remains / the Kang variants do have a history with ancient Egypt, with the Kang variant Pharaoh Rama-Tut and He Remains having the pyramids and the Sphinx in the void. In our season 1 recap series, we actually spotted that Sphinx in the void has a nose, and it looks like the nose of Jonathan Majors, which kind of reminds me of Crash Bandicoot 3 when the Egyptian tomb levels have a Sphinx with a time-traveling Dr. Neo Cortex's face on it. Behind the Baron, there is a figure with a gator head that kind of looks like Ammit. That's a deity who appeared in Moon Knight, and one of these others could be Pharaoh Rama-Tut. Hugo, a Florida orange juice vendor, tosses Victor an orange to throw at the Baron's man. Now, there is a Hugo the Great from the 2014 Origin 2 Wolverine Dr. Essex comics who worked at a carnival, but orange does kind of become the color of the TVA, so this might just be the origin of Victor's favorite color. Later, we see his bedspread also is the color orange. Victor skips the Ferris wheel line, passing some suffragettes. They have sashes and leaflets reading, "Give us ballots." Victor gives the Baron the slip by luring him into this crowded carriage on the Ferris wheel and then crawling back out as the gate closes, trapping him on the ride. This is essentially what He Remains does to the people on the sacred timeline. He evades discovery from them and then traps them on this loop where they never really go anywhere. Casey and B-15 warn Mobius and Sylvie.
That is a good connection. That is a good connection. I mean, I don't even know if that would be the intention. That would be pretty wild if it was. This could be one of those situations where we're like reading into a thing. I was like, oh my gosh, that is what brilliant. And the writers were just, haha, trapped on Ferris wheel. And we're like adding all of this contextual meaning to it that they never really intended. It happens all the time, man. But it makes sense. It does, in a way, represent his whole scheme. Just right there in like a brief, concise little moment. Good one, team. Good one, Team New Rockstars.
All right. Look, you're really good at getting away.
Renslayer and Mobius wonder how she tracked them there, but remember, Sylvie has He Remains Master Tempad, which would have a greater depth of omniscience of all TVA employees than the other more limited TVA Tempads. Sylvie promised to kill any He Remains variants who would show up, and she tries to make good on her promise here. She charges,
if you and the TVA hadn't messed with him, he'd have remained harmless.
I like how she says he'd have remained there.
Oh, that's cool.
Young Victor would have just stayed on the sacred timeline making candles had Renslayer not intervened with the book. Loki says, I didn't give him this book, and he tosses the book over his shoulder, but Victor doesn't catch it because he's, levitated. But it reminds us of when OB tossed this book over his shoulder and Tom Hiddleston deftly caught it. Victor isn't the original author of this book. Loki has to break the levitation spell to toss Victor back to the carriage floor to rejoin with the book. Sylvie says, this is all very familiar, isn't it? And Loki holds his hands out in a surrendering pose, kind of like he did when they dueled in season 1, episode 6. They never really got to resolve that conflict. Sylvie and Loki conjure their green sorcery, but Sylvie's must have been stronger because it's Loki and Victor who are blown back. With the robber baron approaching again, Renslayer unleashes Miss Minutes. As she grows, notice her clock turns into a little skirt, making her look like a giant Pac-Man ghost. As she stomps toward the crowd, dust forms around her steps, and she tears down the
she's got
flag line,
mass.
reminding us that she can interact with the physical world. Mobius offers Loki to hop on a tandem bicycle. Loki initially turns it down, but later we see them riding it together. Amazing.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Mobius' dream jet ski. I really think Mobius is just a big fan of two-seaters. Let's keep an eye out for what kind of bike Broxton McDonald's Jack pedals home, because I think he and Mobius might be the same person.
I've been seeing that theory a lot, and that would be neat.
Built for two. The song sung by the evil computer Hal in his dying moments in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Never seen it.
I think Miss Minutes is shaping up to be the ultimate villain of this season. Evil AI. Victor takes Renslayer back to his home, and we see storage and signs for a Chinese restaurant, which might be for the fair. He seats Renslayer in a refrigerator chair that's right beside the window that she threw the book in through. Victor says that the chair can go down to 40 degrees, and it's kind of another parallel to Tony Stark's inventions. Remember, after the Iron Man Mark II armor had icing problems, he installed heaters in all of his armor, including Peter's suit in Homecoming, and in Iron Man 2, he customized his suit so that he could get really drunk in it and pee in it. Miss Minutes senses a flirty energy between Victor and Renslayer and gets jealous. She redirects the attention back to herself.
So, did you like my performance back there? Ooh.
Bravo. It was marvelous.
He Remains called Renslayer quite a marvel on the recording, so calling Miss Minutes marvelous now, you could see some jealousy forming there. Miss Minutes describes herself, finally.
I'm a fully conscious and sentient artificial intelligence entity.
Yeah, this episode finally begins to shed light on exactly how sentient Miss Minutes is, what she really is, and from that description and her little curtsy here, I assume she might have her own temporal aura, or she could be based on someone's temporal aura, or either way, really, really longs for one. Victor calls her singular, and she says,
you're pretty singular yourself. At least you will be.
Some clever wordplay there. Singular as in you will one day be remarkable, but also literally one of a kind. As once their plan is reached, Victor Timely will become He Remains, the one and only Kang variant who outlasts the others in the dynasty who have spawned. As she talks, Miss Minutes' hour hand jumps around on her face from the 8 o'clock position to the 4th position. The way this character kind of jumps around in time, it kind of seems like she gets this way when she's nervous. Renslayer begins to explain.
A long time ago, far from now, a different time.
These are the words Miss Minutes used to open her TVA orientation video, long ago, which was a similarly deceptive account. But Renslayer's realizing that these events didn't really unfold in the past or necessarily in the future. Really, they're just all kind of happening at the same time since time is a flat circle. Victor is overwhelmed by Renslayer's explanation.
It's like the story of myself that I always imagined is true.
Again, if it can be dreamed, it can be achieved. Every night when this man dreamt, he saw into He Remains' life when he was building and running the TVA. Miss Minutes scoffs when Renslayer promises to keep him safe.
Even before the TVA, or her, you created me. And we worked together at the end of time.
Miss Minutes dilates her eyes like Puss in Boots to make them huge and adorable. So we learn that Miss Minutes predates Renslayer, at least according to her. She could have been at least part of He Remains' downloaded consciousness, like where he stores his darkest secrets. Victor asks,
and you, Mrs.
Ms. Ravonna.
That look on Miss Minutes' face. Yeah.
Not only does she pick up on Renslayer hinting that she's single, I think Miss takes offense to Renslayer using the more modern Ms. MS to contrast Miss Minutes MISS, which is more antiquated, and also makes her name a self-contained pun, as she could be the memories and moments that he remains has missed. Victor calls Loki a wizard and Mobius' butler. It's just interesting for Victor to consider Loki a wizard when He Remains to Loki was the Wizard of Oz last season. Victor takes them out through a window saying that he does his sales in Chicago, but his lab is
God, I love it all,
Wisconsin.
man.
Lower taxes.
So in the comics, Victor Timely's residence was the town of Timely, Wisconsin. Outside on the street, there is a wagon marked Honey and Honeycomb. Oh no, WandaVision beekeeper, not today. Loki runs after them through the alley and passes a cart, J.W. Taylor's Milk and Cream. They board this steamship, the SS Heron, which is a shout out to Kate Herron, who directed the season 1 episodes and really gave this series its signature quirk. Victor asks for the usual accommodations, and we see they stow in a lifeboat so Victor, won't have to pay the fare. Victor shows her the TVA guidebook and how
Oh, I didn't even realize that they were already in it. So when she fell asleep, they got off it and dropped her.
Starts to creep to the other side of the lifeboat so that she can be closer to Victor and glare at Renslayer from behind him. We see Ouroboros'
the entire
photo
time
in the guidebook, and Victor says he respects this man. I really do think OB was the OG, the original He Who Remains. Not necessarily a Kang variant, but I just think he's some kind of angelic entity who represents time. Victor shows her his
That would be cool. Because he'll probably get to it here later, but like we learned that his aura doesn't work. If he was a variant, it would have worked, because we got that clarification in this episode that variants would pass as long as they are of the same person that they need to access the panel. So, and he's got this knowledge of all of it, and while I don't know, he's a very intriguing character. His name seems like it's part of the bigger picture in some way that we just don't know yet.
His throughput multiplier, a term and design that we saw in the closing credits of each episode. It seems to be kind of a flux capacitor keystone piece to make all this technology work. And Renslayer says,
I have high hopes for this partnership.
Wrong choice of words. He pulls away because he doesn't do partners. So he and Miss Minutes cut her loose.
Because like the moment she said that, because they were holding hands, and then she said the partnership line, and then immediately cuts to him pulling back. A nice little detail.
Emily's Wisconsin lab is filled with mannequins. Remember, part of He Remains tinkering included the construction of timekeeper androids, so we could be seeing the early steps toward that. The steel buttresses of this room have swirling spiral patterns that kind of look like the windows in the center of the end of time. His chalkboard is filled with equations and designs. I can't make up the letters N-R. Maybe a new Rockstars shout out. So, thank you. Probably not. But there is a donut shape, which could be his early brainstorming of the sacred timeline. I just like how above this board is a row of clocks, which reminds me of
could be an everything bagel.
Back to the Future, which was filled with clocks. Victor lifts his throughput multiplier, and we see that it's a series of gears and cogs.
I didn't know what the fuck he was holding there.
That's the mechanism attributed to Archimedes and the central weapon in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny that came out earlier this year. Also had to do with time travel. Now the fat end of his loom construction that's on the table beneath the windows kind of looks like an arc reactor, which would make sense because Victor pitched this device as a clean energy generator the way Stark viewed
so
his
many
reactor.
small details like that.
To make a move on Victor. In her black and white form, she turns orange, but she blushes to begin the saturation.
Yeah.
And the gesture she makes with her hand is kind of like she's flirtily brushing her hair out of her eyes. Miss Minutes says that He Remains created her before the war, before the TVA, just an AI to play chess with, and then gave her autonomy to write her own programming. Actually, John Carpenter's The Thing is the next video analysis we're doing on the Deep Dive channel, and it opens with MacReady playing chess against a female voice computer, and it doesn't end well. Another parallel between He Remains and Tony Stark as well. Tony invented true AI with Ultron, and that AI turned against him. We learn that Miss Minutes' real interest in this reset version of He Remains is the hope that he might actually grant her a body.
If I had a body, we could truly lead together.
Why does Miss Minutes want to be confined to a physical body if she's clearly more powerful as a ghost?
And maybe that, well, is she though? Or is she just less threatening? I mean, she can interact with stuff. So, I mean, she can do stuff and do damage. So it just begs the question, because the thing that made Ultron even more dangerous than just being able to surf the web and all that kind of stuff and manipulate all the gadgetry is once he got a physical army for himself to enact like physical damage to the world. So maybe He Remains just abstained from ever willfully giving her a body because of certain issues like that potentially showing their hands if she had like an actual physical body. But at the same time, that's counteracted with the fact that she can already interact with physical objects. She's got mass, she's got, weight, she can interact, collide with things. I don't know. I'm not sure about that one.
In the TVA machine, it's clear that she just longs for a physical touch. And I think this tells us that she misses having a mortal shell, that she might have once been a corporeal human, that she could just be a floating temporal aura. Either way, she misses having the ability to measure her life in minutes. Minutes. He remains, I think,
525,600
maybe Renslayer, or this could just be a detached temporal aura itself. Either way, based on this episode and how Victor Timely is mostly a harmless con man so far, I think Miss Minutes is being set up as the primary villain of the season.
I mean, that's kind of how it's looking, man.
On several occasions, like right here when she projects her face on the head of a mannequin and just
her eyes start
to glitch, so that when she flirtily winks, it's not that noticeable because it's buried in all of these other involuntary glitches.
It looks like a glitching like TikTok filter where it doesn't quite adhere to your face and it just starts popping. Has the same effect.
Bending her shape like this and trying to become human is just not good for her programming. She leaps onto the table to stop him from minimizing her, and it's scary, but on her last "I love you," we see her hand clawing at his face and his glasses start to go up. Because remember, Miss Minutes can't affect the physical world. She clawed at his face. Renslayer fires up a weapon.
Still a prototype, quite unstable.
Yeah, this is an early pruning stick, but since it's unstable, we don't know what it will do to people. Like when she sticks the mannequin, it doesn't exactly make the same rainbow-colored slow prune that pruning sticks normally cause. This is faster and ashier. Mobius and Loki arrive while Ravonna, or Vaughn as Mobius adorably calls her, holds this glowing orange thread to Victor. Loki holsters some glowing green energy from his palm. So again, there's that orange versus green color scheme. While most things in this nostalgic setting have been desaturated and sepia-toned, it's just interesting how the outside wizardry, whether it's through technology or sorcery, is bright orange or bright green. Renslayer says,
all that matters is order versus chaos. I'm order.
Right after this, Sylvie blasts into the workshop as if to say, and I'm chaos. Victor thinks,
I haven't done anything.
Oh, you will. You'll do terrible things.
Sylvie finds herself in the kind of baby Hitler dilemma, killing someone to prevent what they'll do in the future, like Sarah Connor going after Miles Dyson in T2, Cable attacking the kid in Deadpool 2, Bruce Willis targeting that kid in Moonbird, and what Rudy proposed to do to Thanos. But this is also the justification TVA used to arrest Sylvie when she was a girl. I think her realizing the injustice of that is why Sylvie can't bring herself to kill him, because it's not fair to judge someone by the actions of their variants.
You don't know.
That's what I brought up in my reaction, man. She in this moment is Renslayer. When Renslayer came to get her because of things she never did, because she's a variant of somebody she's never met, she's the kind of byproduct of the natural order of the world that someone deems not okay. Like, yeah, she's the one that came in, gave her no reason, no nothing, just the fact that she existed was all she needed to take her out of her timeline and destroy it completely, ruin her life wholly. And in this moment, Sylvie's about to do, in her own frustration and anger over everything that's happened and transpired against the TVA, against He Who Remains, who instilled and kind of propagated that entire thing, is now in that position and making the same call. And she thankfully realizes this and can't go through with it and cannot like concede to becoming the thing she's been afraid of or hated the entire time. She almost became the thing she hates the most.
Oh, the heart I have beating in my chest. I can make my own choices.
Sylvie tells Renslayer that if all she wants is a seat at the end of time,
be careful what you wish for.
Because the one sitting in that seat is destined to rot in it. Sylvie uses He Who Remains Master Tempad to open a door back to the Citadel at the end of time, which we see has crumbled into further ruin. Remember, the concept of this building was for it to have cracked kintsugi patterns. The whole thing would be carved out of the rock of this asteroid. But now we learn that these cracks trace a kind of fault line for these real fissures to follow. Like it was this place's destiny to crumble. He Who Remains core corpse remains seated there, rotting. And we see candles on 2 stands melted down, like is every variant of He Who Remains into candle making. We see there's a triangular shape on the floor with a word in it. This was actually part of the set in season 1, episode 6. It was just kind of hard to make out, but here we see it is a Latin term, epistulus, reminding us of the Latin that translated to for all time always on the floor of the body. So ab epistulus referred to the chancellor's office in the Roman Empire responsible for the emperor's correspondence, sending instructions to all the local governors. This is, in a way, the function of this particular chamber. It's where He Remains would write the script for the sacred timeline and send instructions to the TVA. Renslayer brings back up Miss Minutes.
Love you.
Oh, Miss Minutes was completing her sentence right when Victor Timely switched her off, but instead she accidentally professes a bit of sisterly love to Renslayer, because Miss Minutes says,
Well, it was foolish of him to make an enemy out of someone who knows all his secrets.
Ah, Miss Minute says that she knows a dirty, dark secret about Renslayer. I assume that secret is going to be the recording that we heard back in the season 2 premiere, that He Remains had promised Renslayer that they would be partners. I think we're gonna learn that Renslayer might have been that 4th statue that was broken in the lobby. And remember, there is a barricaded region of the Citadel that I pointed out in my deep dive of season 1. And I actually just realized that it was designed into the blueprints of the set by Kazra Farahani, who directed this episode. That could have been part of the Citadel. That was the love nest of He Remains and Renslayer when they were happy together. Okay, maybe. To the closing credits, we see Miss Minutes is in cartoony black and white now when she was in color in previous end credit sequences. We see the stage at the World's Fair beer hall that has Victor's loom on it. And then the casting photos show Renslayer with a prototype pruning stick, Victor Timely as an adult, Victor as a kid making candles, Sylvie and Loki and Mobius at the World's Fair. And wait a minute, who's that man on the right behind him? Is that
H.H. Holmes?
We got him! To me, this episode had everything. Chicago history, Balder the Brave, great music, mind-breaking time travel logic, and finally some details on Miss Minutes. I'm loving this season, and thank you to all of you folks for watching these breakdowns and showing us so much love. Please support us by grabbing some of our exclusive—
We're all gonna die! Oh god, I need that shirt. Great breakdown, man. Like a lot of just thematic parallels in the cinematography and just the writing and the dialogue and everything that just kind of echo the whole concept and idea of He Who Remains existence, his plan, his pattern, his sequence, the cycle that he is trying to keep alive and going. It's so wild, man. And all these little like design details. And again, this show and its production team, like from the art design, the costuming to just the sets and everything, they always go like above and beyond for making all these little things. So like the things that looks like the arc reactor, that's got to be intentional. Like there's all these small little things that kind of evoke a certain concept or idea that we've seen before in the MCU, and it's just like, it's got to be all thought out, and it can't all be us just trying to make connections out of something. You know, the Ferris wheel thing, I think that might be us projecting, even though it works, or it very well could be intended. God, that's a good thought. If that was something that they meant to do, that is good job on you, whoever came up with that idea. Like everything else in this was just fantastic, man. It was just so much fun. But what I'm surprised he didn't touch on was that little line about the variants. We found a Kang variant. We just need to get him here, use his aura to activate the loom so that we can make the modifications. That's why they're bringing him back. He is a variant. He's not He Who Remains, as we will know him eventually. So I don't know. It's I don't know. I don't know. Or, I mean, maybe he could be. Still, there could be a way you could make that around to where he is just recreating himself. I don't know. How would that help the next cycle? It wouldn't be him because he would have already been dead at any point in time after that. I mean, unless he always returns to that point to die. I don't know. But that scene with Casey and Hunter B-15 and all that, you know, it implied that they could use a variant, that it doesn't need to specifically be He Who Remains. So that does raise a couple of questions while also closing off a couple of speculations that we had up until now, unless there's something else we don't quite know just yet. But fun episode. Wild little details throughout. So much fun. I love these period piece settings where we just get to kind of live and bake in the era of the time, playing with the timeline, playing with the time travel of it all. Because that's something we didn't quite do in season 1 that much at all. And I love that we're doing that here from episode 1 to 2 to now. I'm loving it. But guys, what did you think? Were there any details that you caught that maybe they missed here? Any theories that they maybe didn't dive into at all that you guys have? I'd love to hear from you all. So sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Hope you enjoyed the reaction. If you did, leave a like, drop a comment, subscribe if you're not already. Make sure to subscribe to New Rockstars. I'll have a link to their channel down in the description below. And before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends. Manny Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Yora Coruscant, Margaret Grace, Melita, Robert Anguiano, Jeffrey Hale, Jake Cantrell, Eric Official, Amy Becca, and Casey Wood. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. But that's it for this video, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care, everybody.